Short answer, yes. Thank you guys for watching and see you guys tomorrow. No, but for real though, let's try to answer this question that has been going on in the community recently after what we have seen certain very high level players do in the past few weeks, which is completing a very high dungeon, a very high Mythic Plus dungeon without a healer. Okay, so how does that work? Well, we have seen certain players like Zmok completing multiple keys without healers, going as high as a plus 27 without using a healer. We have seen also a few days ago Nerf completing a plus 28 Court of Stars without any healers, and we have even seen this a few days ago in the MDI. In the MDI, pretty much all of the participants run Court of Stars without a healer. So, to explain, this happens, well, first of all, this happens because Court of Stars is the easiest dungeon to complete without a healer, followed by Shadow Moon Burial Grounds. So, the two dungeons you will see this the most at that high level of a key for sure are those two. In the lower keys, 20, 21, 22, you can also see it in the other dungeons, but particularly those two are the easiest one to complete without a healer. How do you complete it is very simply by bringing the tank that can heal the rest of the party the most, which is Protection Paladin, and then a whole bunch of DPS specs that can either heal the party or be self-sufficient, be very tanky by themselves. So you can bring a Shadow Priest with Vampiric Embrace, you can bring a Druid, a DPS Druid with Nature's Vigil, you can bring an Enhancement Shaman with Ancestral Guidance and a Maelstrom empowered Chain Heal, and then tanky specs like Warriors, like Warlocks, or like Demon Hunters with lots of self-sustain. So once you combine all of these together, once you form this Exodia, you end up being able to sustain rotating these off-healing cooldowns without the need of a healer. And of course, everything will die much faster because now you have an extra DPS. So the fight is shorter, which means there is less to heal, right? So that's the idea behind the way in which these groups can clear dungeons without a healer. Now, some players, of course, some healers, immediately went in danger mode. My job is at risk. I'm about to be evicted from my role. The world is ending. So that's why we are having this video right now. This is to point out that no, in Season 2, you will still be needing a healer for quite a long time, and also for the majority of the normal players clearing high keys in Mythic Plus. So I'm counting the normal player base doing high keys being in the 20, 21, 22 key range. That is the mid-core, casual, high level of keys. In that range, that is still something that you will be needing very easily for the majority of the player base. However, the reason why it's much less likely for this to happen in Season 2, for at the very least the first few months of Season 2, is because obviously Season 2 will be resetting everything. We will start Season 2 as very under-geared, right? We will be some 30 plus item levels behind where we are now at the top of the item level curve of the season. We will have no tier set, none of the new season's tier set. All of the dungeons, if we go by Blizzard's balancing, all of the dungeons will be very overtuned, will be very overpowered, not to mention the addition of the new affixes, which, as we have seen, they seem to be a complete nightmare and make the dungeons much harder and much more annoying to deal with. So at the start of the season, it's very likely that you will still very easily be needing a healer to do your stuff in Mythic Plus. So no, the job of the healer is not in danger in Mythic Plus anytime soon. However, it's still worth talking about why is this even happening? Why is this allowed? Why do we have this thing even viable in the game? The reason for this is because the healer's job in Mythic Plus is very difficult to balance. Blizzard has been stuck into two ways of balancing the healer in Mythic Plus. Either you have the role where the healer doesn't have much to heal. So 60+% of the time, maybe even more, there is nothing to heal. So if you have nothing to heal as a healer, you might as well do damage. That's what happened in Shadowlands. In case you didn't play Shadowlands, the meta healer in Shadowlands was the one that did the most damage. Why? Because there wasn't that much to heal. Therefore, the one that can do the most damage was the most important one, which is why in Season 1 of Shadowlands, the meta healer was Holy Paladin, because Ventir Holy Paladin had the most damage. In Season 2, it was Kyrian Resto Shaman, because Kyrian Resto Shaman had the most damage, and in Season 3 it was Kyrian Holy Priest, because Holy Priest with Boon of the Ascended plus Power Infusion had the most damage. So that's what happened in Shadowlands when Blizzard made the healers not need nearly as much healing. So when Dragonflight launched, you might remember, many players were shocked by how Mythic Plus worked, because the healing requirements were incredibly high, were very overtuned, and the healing needed was massive in many trash packs. For example, the Inferno casts on the big elementals in Ruby Life Pools, the trash packs, pretty much all of the trash packs in Nokud Offensive. You had the many types of annoyances of mobs, of trash mobs in Azure Vaults. There were plenty of complaints about the damage coming in dungeons, not to mention bosses. Tons and tons of bosses now doing lots of unavoidable, undodgeable AoE damage. The first boss of Ruby Life Pools, the second boss of Ruby Life Pools, you had the second boss of Azure Vault, the third boss of Azure Vault, Raging Tempest, the second boss of Nokud Offensive. You had tons of bosses doing lots of AoE damage. So we ended up in the opposite of Shadowlands. Now, rather than having the healer that does the most damage as the meta healer, we now have the healer that can do the most AoE healing to be the meta healer. So we have Preservation Evoker and Restoration Druid. Those were the two healers that could sustain the party the best at the very high keys. And it was a very clear difference. We got in the first month or so of the season some very clear divides where, for example, Resto Druid and Preservation Evokers were able to clear a plus 25 Nokud Offensive on Tyrannical, so doing the Raging Tempest boss on 25 Tyrannical, where some other healers like Holy Paladin or even something like Mistweaver Monk or Resto Shaman were stuck at doing plus 21. They were 4 full levels below Preservation Evoker and Resto Druid. So Blizzard, what did they do to fix this? Well, they were forced to nerf all of these bosses, because if they don't nerf them, those specs are simply not able to pass these bosses. They would be walls that these specs could not go through. Of course, some would say, isn't a better solution to just buff the specs that cannot get past these bosses? Apparently, Blizzard's answer was no. So instead, what they did is severely nerf many of these bosses, even multiple times to some of them. So that's why we got the first boss and the second boss of Ruby Life Pools nerfed multiple times. We got the second and third boss of Azure Vault nerfed multiple times. We got the Raging Tempest on Nokud Offensive also nerfed multiple times, so that now their very heavy AoE damage was reduced and allowed more of the weaker healers to start going through them. Now, however, we are starting to go back to the problem of Shadowlands. We have nerfed the damage requirements to be healed in dungeons so much that now healing has gotten much less important. Now it's not nearly as important to do healing. So what's important now instead? Now it's more important to do damage. Guess who is the highest damage dealing spec in the game right now for Mythic Plus and for healers? Now it's Resto Shaman, who is growing at a very alarming rate in Mythic Plus, in very high keys as well. It's Resto Shaman. So even though the answer is yes, of course, we are still going to need healers in Season 2. Yes, of course, this strategy of bringing one tank, 4 DPS is just a niche, it's just a niche, nice pastime for some very high-level players to try something new and different, and is not going to turn into the meta way to do Mythic Plus. So no, the healers are not going to be losing their jobs. It was still something interesting because it highlighted the problems in balancing healers in Mythic Plus. If you give the healers too little healing to do, then what's gonna become more important is who does the most damage, and eventually, if you give them such little to do, players might start to think, can't we just bench the healer and bring an extra DPS if there is so little to heal? Thanks to the reworked Dragonflight talents, we have tons of utility we can take as a DPS to give us off healing, especially the hybrid specs like Shaman, like Druid for example. So if there is little healing required, if Blizzard keeps nerfing the dungeons over and over, then we might start simply not needing healers. Also, if Blizzard goes the other way, if Blizzard keeps the dungeons where the most important thing is tons of healing, is very difficult bosses, very high damage trash where tons of healing is required, then we end up in the opposite situation. A situation where that damage will be so high that certain healer specs simply won't be able to cope, won't be able to deal with that damage. And we end up in the situation we have gotten at the start of Dragonflight, where the only healers able to cope with certain situations were Preservation Evoker and Resto Druids. And other specs, pretty much all of the other specs, were simply stuck 3, 4, 5 key levels below because they did not have the healing required. That's why I think it was cool to look over at this situation, this 4 DPS situation, not really because I think it's gonna end up being some meta situation in the future seasons, but because it highlights how it is currently difficult for Blizzard to be able to balance, to be able to put healers in a pretty stable situation in how much damage do they need in a key, and also how much healing do they need in a key to make it feel even for the specs. That is, I think, what was highlighted by this funny pastime at the end of this season to run keys without a healer, even though I don't think it will impact in any way the new season. So this was the point for today's video, talking about what has been happening recently with this no heal comps and what it showed when it comes to the healers in Mythic Plus and how they work. But beyond that, I don't think it's gonna end up in anything else. Yes, healers, you will still keep your jobs in Season 2, don't worry. Even if some players like to run some no healer keys, you still have your job quite secure for Season 2. With this disclaimer, trying to calm the healers down, we can now leave each other on this Wednesday. We are starting our goodbyes, of course, as usual, with our Patreon supporters. Thanks, of course, as usual, for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel. However, there is still support to be given completely for free. You can like and comment down below on this video because that's what YouTube wants. You can also subscribe to the channel itself, and you can also support by following me over on my Twitter, as well as following me over on my stream over on Twitch. With this out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, why though? Why does it always have to be the healer to be cut off when something gets exploited? Even in the raid, let's just cut off one more healer.